focus on three clashes that we had in our debate today. The first one is, what exactly is blind justice or equality in front of the law? The second is, how will this motion impact rich people in particular? And the third one is, will there be more or less crime in the world that's to come? But first, I just want to point out quickly two things that were shocked that you had to wait till closing opposition to get. Number one is reading the second half of the motion, rather than the severity of the offense. Right? We're the first ones to point out, as Sharon tells you, the burden on government is to tell us why we should not punish based on the severity of the offense, and we are telling you why punishments based on the severity of the offense are the most effective way of telling society why this is wrong. But second of all, what do? We don't just tell you what should happen if we pass this motion, what are the ideals behind it. We tell you what will happen tomorrow. How does the world look when this happens? How does it actually impact rich and poor people alike? And what happens, not what should happen because we're lawmakers, but what does happen because we are citizens of the world. Now, you'll notice I commend the room on an organized enough debate that I think our rebuttal can entirely be involved in the clashes because I think everything was on clash, but there is rebuttal nevertheless, so take note because it's coming. So first of all, blind justice. All right, what we get here is opening government tells us you need to have the same proportional impact. Whereas opening opposition uses the phrase blind justice or the law is blind or whatever we want to call it, where everyone should pay the same amount. We think it's an interesting discussion. And then closing government essentially gives us the same thing as opening government, but they call it the principle of equal law. We think it's the same thing and we'll respond to all of them alike. But what do we give you? First of all, when the law is blind, what does it mean that there's blind justice? Unfortunately, opening opposition didn't quite understand what the phrase means because there's so much more there. The police have to be blind. If a police officer is now 10 times more likely to stop a Maserati than a Mazda, then the law is not blind. There's not equality, not only in terms of the fines that we are paying, where we agree obviously with opening opposition, that it's not fair to pay different fines, and we'll get to that also, but more importantly, and this is what Sharon adds to you, in terms of who actually gets fined, because now, especially with the logic that we got from the Prime Minister, that the government makes revenue from this, well, the government now has a very clear incentive to unfairly target rich people, because those are the people who can give the government much more money. We think that's a problem, and that's why we think when we talk about blind justice and what's fair, we need the police to be fair, and we're the only ones who give you that. Now, of course, we also think the amount here should be the same because of what we told you about the impact on rich people. And now, I'm moving to my second clash, but note that it still answers this point. When I tell you about the impact on rich people, I explain to you why the equal fine, you know what? One point of somewhat external rebuttal, sorry if it's unclear, on the point of how it is that we need the same amount. And note, this wasn't mentioned explicitly by Sharon, but it's clear rebuttal to what we were told. This is comparative to what you are going. If I'm on my way to a concert and you're on your way to a concert, it doesn't matter how much each of us makes. Will I speed or not? The ticket I paid for was $100. Now, do I want to lose that opportunity? Right, a fine is in terms of what I will lose out on, what I can now not buy. That's the way a fine works. Rich people and poor people alike will lose out on what they could buy and now cannot buy. We think that amounts to enough to defend what opening opposition told you in terms of equality, simply because money is objective. It works the same way. I can buy the same things. Now, he can't buy a pair of shoes. I can't buy a pair of shoes. That's a certain level of equality, but certainly, as we told you, we think that's enough to tell you why opening government's case is not critical there. But again, as we told you, we think the more critical point here is how the police now become unequal, and they start to target people unfairly. Now, how does this impact rich people? So opening government tells us, we know you got on this one. You just tell us it's a deterrent. Right? Rich people will have more of a deterrent, so they're less likely to commit crimes. Now, again, we don't think it's the rich people who are committing the most crimes, etc., so we think there's serious mitigation there already. But secondly, opening opposition basically tells you, yeah, more or less what we've said now. The rich people aren't the big issue in this debate. Now, they seem to concede, or at least not fully rebut that point, but I think they mitigate it quite well. Rich people aren't the main issue in this debate. We don't seem to have some major problem, which our Prime Minister could have told us about, that rich people are right and left committing crazy crimes. But what do we add to you here? We tell you how not only does it not positively impact rich people by giving them a deterrent, it has a huge negative impact. Because what happens in the world now? First of all, they feel chased by the police, which, just in terms of justice, we feel is inequality, not right now. So that inequality is in itself an issue. But more importantly, there's real antagonism right? Rich people are less likely to cooperate with the police, and the way police operate is by having people call when there are things happening, right? Imagine I don't want to call the police to my house now if I'm rich, because while I'm calling the police to deal with domestic violence from my neighbors, they'll probably notice my lawn is grown a bit too high, and they love to find me because it doesn't matter, it's not the severity of the offense. My punishment is so much greater now that I don't want to help with the police. They're not interesting to me, and as such, I'm being chased. And again, people who don't care about the law as much because they feel chased is a net negative impact in their ability to commit crimes first. Yes?
Yes. If more rich criminals are stopped, they're still criminals, and poor people, especially minorities, are currently over-policed.
Thank you. All right. There are plenty of people who could be over-policed, under-policed. Ultimately, we think that justice should be blind, as we told you. We think that point is fairly clear. It should be done based on the severity of the offense. That is the point that you have to rebut, and you haven't fulfilled in any way that burden that's on you to tell us that it's not based on the severity of the offense. We think that should be the criterion for police and not what's going to happen in this world. And certainly when we think rich people are so influential in calling the police in cases of major money embezzlement, etc., we don't want to lose their cooperation. Now, lastly, what do we have here? Ultimately, is there more or less crime in the world? All right? And opening government, again, just with their deterrent. Okay, deterrents are better, fewer crimes, fine. Opening opposition comes and tells us, well, there's not really an impact here because it's not the rich people. But what do we tell you? We tell you that in terms of rich people, we anticipate more crime either being committed or being facilitated simply because they don't care, right? They can get away with it with lawyers anyway. That's not the critical point. The critical point is they don't trust the police, they don't like the police, they won't involve the police, and the lack of cooperation hurts them a lot. But now, we also tell you, Sharon tells you about poor people as well. What's going to happen? He tells you they care less about what's going on, right? Because ultimately, they're being hurt anyway by these fines, right? So now, we think, yes, it's still, how much can I buy? And if poor people are being fined so much less, we think they need greater deterrent. If we're talking about justice and how we can deter people, we think it needs to hurt poor people more because they are the people most responsible for all these reasons. Please oppose.